Good morning, my beautiful diamonds and my Teletubbies. I want to talk to you today about how to strengthen your faith and your trust in God and Jesus Christ when you're going through trials and tribulation, because I know that's one of the hardest things for people to achieve. And I'm speaking from experience myself. It took me a long time for me to have the kind of faith and trust in God that I'm supposed to have so that I don't go through a life filled with depression, constant worrying, and anxiety and aggravation. And I had to work. It took me a minute, to learn that when you trust in God and Christ to do the best for you, you don't have to worry. You don't have to have all of these anxieties about things. Because when you go to God through his son Jesus Christ for peace in a situation so you don't have to worry, it's a beautiful thing. And I think we have all learned by now that peace is one of the most valuable things you can have in life. And when you continue to worry, it implies that you don't trust that Jehovah God and Jesus Christ is big enough or powerful enough or loving enough to take care of you and to do what's best for you. And when they say believe and you will receive, that is so true. And I'm speaking from experience. Trust me, I would not mislead you. Let me share a nice clip with you from a young man. He's 29, and he realizes that just because you are a child of God, that don't mean you're not going to have trials and tribulation. Here he is, and his TikTok is Labor for Christ. He's so young, and I'm just so proud of him.
Good afternoon with an urgent message. Your faith will be tested. If you're a child of God, you got to understand it is not sunsets and roses. It's not just highs. It's many trials and tribulations that children of God go through. So if you're a child of God and you think that I'm not going to go through nothing, why me? Read the book of Job. Job didn't do nothing wrong, and everything was taken from him, his health, his wealth, but he still trusted in God. He didn't curse God. So I don't know what you're going through right now, but if you're going through something that may seem tough or why me, don't ask why me. Many times it's being tested. It's testing. God is only testing to see if you're going to hold on to him or you're going to trust him. It refines you. It prunes you to be a better child of God. So let me wrap this up. Your faith will be tested, but the reward is at the end of the test. Hold on, because it will get better in Jesus' name. I love you with the love of Christ. God bless and take care. Peace.
I just had to share this young man's message because, one, considering his age, and two, when you look at his TikTok, Laborer for Christ, you see this man on the train, you see him out in public, you see him out there with his Bible, and he is like giving his testimony, his sermon, and he's doing everything in his power with a sincere heart because his faith and his trust in God is amazing. And I'm just so proud of him. And I appreciate the fact when he said, just because you are a child of God, that doesn't mean you won't face tests and trials. In fact, it's often the opposite. Now, we all know that life is full of challenges. And as believers, we're not exempt. Think about it like this. Even the most faithful people in the Bible, in the scriptures, they faced immense struggles. Let's think about Moses, how he faced Pharaoh's refusal to release those Israelites, and he was wandering in the wilderness for eons because he was dealing with these rebellious Israelites. And you can read about that in Exodus chapter 3 through 17 and Numbers chapter 13 through 14. And then you have David. He was confronted with Goliath, and he fled from King Saul when he was running from Saul, because Saul had grew jealous of David. And he also experienced family turmoil because he had disobeyed Jehovah and his family had to suffer. And that's at 1 Samuel chapter 17 and also chapter 18 through 31. And then what about Daniel? Remember how he endured persecution, the lion's den, and the fiery furnace? You can read about that in Daniel chapter 1 through 6. And we don't want to forget Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were faced also with that fiery furnace, and they were persecuted. Daniel chapter 3. And then you also have women of the Bible like Esther. She risked her life to save the Jews from genocide. And you can read that account in Esther chapter 1 through 10. And then there was Hannah. She experienced being infertile, not able to give birth, not able to have children. And back then, that was like your whole worth, your whole value. Thank God those days have changed. But back then, Hannah, she experienced this infertility and she was ridiculed for it. And she went to God in prayer and she continued to have perseverance. And because of her perseverance, she was rewarded for her faith. You can read about that at 1 Samuel chapter 1. What about Elijah? He faced drought, famine, and Jezebel's threats. 1 Kings chapter 17 through 19. And above all else, as we know, Jesus Christ, he endured many trials, tribulations, temptation, persecution, and the crucifixion. Matthew chapter 4 through 27. Amazing, but as he said, Jesus said he learned obedience from the things he suffered, and he realized that doing things God's way and God's will, it was proven to be the best way to go. And then what about Peter? He overcame denial. He denied Jesus 3 times. He felt, can you imagine how horrible he must have felt? He also went through imprisonment and persecution. Matthew chapter 26 and Acts chapter 4 through 12. We all know about the Apostle Paul. That man, he went through so many trials, hardship. He went through shipwrecks, beatings, imprisonment. You can read all about it in 2 Corinthians chapter 11 and 12. And we don't ever want to forget Stephen, how he was stoned to death. He endured stoning and persecution because he would not turn his back on God and Christ. Acts chapter 6 and 7. And what about John? He experienced exile and persecution on Patmos. Revelation chapter 1. You can read it there. And one of our all-time favorites besides Jesus Christ is always Job. Sudden loss of his family. All 10 of his children died in a single day. What about severe illness? He was afflicted with painful boils from the top of his head all the way down to his toes. He suffered from financial ruin. He lost his entire livestock and all of his possessions. And then what about the emotional part, the emotional turmoil? He had a wife that was not encouraging at all. She encouraged him, why don't you just curse God and die already? Because she was sick of it all. You can read about that part in Job chapter 2, verse 9. And then he also had people that he thought was his friends. He went through social isolation by his friends and his community, and how they had distanced themselves from him. They felt you must have done something really wrong and something really bad. And that was not true. So all the people he thought were friends, they were not encouraging at all. And you can read about that at Job chapter 19, verse 13 through 19. What about the spiritual crisis? He was going through all of that, and he began to question, not give up, not curse God and die, but he questioned God's justice and God's purpose. Job chapter 3 through 31. But we think about how he triumphed also. He had unwavering faith. And you can read about that at Job chapter 13, verse 15. And he had restoration. You see what happens when you pass the trials, the tribulations, and the test? God had doubled everything that Job had lost. His possessions, and he was truly blessed. Job chapter 42, verse 10 through 17, And you remember the 10 children that he lost? God had given him a whole new family. He had 10 more children. And when you do your research, they say Job's daughters, they were popping, they were smoking hot. They were the most beautiful women throughout the land. So I can imagine what his sons must have looked like. And we don't want to forget Joseph's trials and his tribulations when he was betrayed. Remember when he was sold into slavery by his own brothers? Betrayal. Genesis chapter 37, verse 23 through 28. And then he was falsely accused of rape. Genesis chapter 39, verse 1 through 20. And we don't want to forget how he spent many years, several years in prison, in the Egyptian prison. Genesis chapter 41, verse 1 through 40. He suffered a separation, a long-term separation from his family. Genesis chapter 37 through 45. And we don't want to forget one of the biggest things of all, temptation. Remember how Potiphar's wife was making advances onto Job? And Job, he got up, picked up, and he ran. So he had to confront that also. And that's at Genesis chapter 39, verse 7 through 10. Now what he learned and how he triumphed, he had forgiveness because he forgave his brothers and he reunited with his family, even though they did him wrong. Genesis chapter 45, verse 1 through 15. And because he remained faithful, he became Egypt's second in command. He was huge. Genesis 41 through 43. And keep in mind how he saved Egypt from famine, prosperity. And also because of his loyalty, his trust, and his depending on God and Christ, he was blessed with a legacy at Genesis 48 and 49. Now we think about the lessons that we learn, that they had a trust in God's sovereignty. Now God's sovereignty means they knew that God has the right to rule. God has the right to tell us how to live and the way we're supposed to go. And then the lessons we can learn is endurance through these trials that we may be going through. And what about with people who have done us wrong? We also learn forgiveness and mercy. And then we have faithfulness despite adversity. And we know how God will always, through his son Jesus Christ, redeem us and bring us back to restoration. Now, when we think about these stories, it reminds us that trials are a part of our journey. And it's not a sign of abandonment, or it's not a sign that you have lost God's favor. When we encounter difficulties, it's easy to question our faith or wonder if we've done something wrong. But remember this, tests can refine us, and it can also make us so much stronger. These tests and trials, they can strengthen our character and also deepen our relationship with our great Creator. God doesn't promise a life free from hardship. However, this is what he does promise. He promised to be with us through it all. In Isaiah chapter 43, verse 2, he says, "When you pass through the waters, I will be with you." This means that even in our darkest moments, we are never alone. So when you find yourself in a trial, don't lose heart. Embrace the challenge and see it as an opportunity for your growth. And stop to ask yourself, what can I learn from this? How can this experience shape me into a stronger believer? Remember, being a child of God, it means that you have the strength. You have the power to endure whatever is thrown your way. Your faith also can be an example of hope for other people who are also struggling. So stand firm and know that every test, it's an opportunity to grow closer to your Lord and Savior and your great Creator, Yahweh Jehovah. Keep the faith, trust the process, and know that your trials are preparing you for something even greater. You're not just surviving, you are thriving. And trust and believe that Jehovah God and Jesus Christ, They have such a huge blessing in store for you. Twinkle, twinkle, twinkle.